Good evening and welcome this evening to another edition of Angles and Attitude. Tonight, we are honored to have with us the legendary Steve Sanders from WGN Chicago, formerly of WGN Chicago. Steve, tonight, this is truly for me because you were one of my favorites watching the WGN News, and I think that was from 1982 to 2020. I was very disappointed when I heard you had to retire in 220. But Steve, what is going on, young man? And thank you for coming on Angles and Attitude.
Well, thank you. That's quite an introduction, John. I hope to live up to that. But let me first try to get something off the screen here, okay? That's good. We're all good. All right, something popped up.
Okay.
What was the question?
Well, the question was this. I started watching you right from the get-go at GN from 82 to 2020. And I think just before that thing, COVID hit, you decided to retire in 2020.
You talk about luck. Let me tell you, they gave me a huge retirement party. I mean, this was a blowout. It went on until, I don't know, midnight, 1 in the morning, and I was getting tired. You can't even leave your retirement party, right? They're still partying. 1 week later, COVID blew up. And it occurred to me that party would have been a super spreader event had it actually happened. So I was very lucky, and also lucky that I retired when I did, because as you know, this business is very challenging for so many people. And in fact, they all use Zoom for interviews, and I guess they still are to a certain extent. But I think it's really difficult for so many of them to do their jobs, and it's just now, I think, getting back to normal.
Exactly. And I remember when we were discussing you coming on, everything has gone to Zoom. I mean, people working from home and everything else. I mean, it's this new way of life, which I'm still adjusting to. But I got to ask you this question. Are you born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama?
I knew that question was coming up. I am, I always said I've got 1 foot in the South and 1 foot in the Midwest. Here's my story. My dad, in fact, my family dates back to Southern Illinois all the way to the 1840s. And I'll tell you a story about that in a minute.
Sure.
My dad was a high school basketball coach in the town of Crossville, Illinois. He was drafted into World War II, went in as a buck private, came out a major, and working at the Pentagon. He comes back with my mom, who we met on a blind date, stationed in Memphis, and they settled back in Crossville, Illinois. He resumed his job as a basketball coach. I think he wanted to make a little more money. He joined State Farm Insurance and became an agent, became a manager. They liked him a lot. He was well educated. He had a master's degree from the U of I. And we moved south when I was 3 years old to Jackson, Mississippi in 1953. And he kind of had a plum job there. They basically gave him State Farm to develop in the states of Louisiana and Mississippi. And so we lived there till 1960. And from there, we moved to Birmingham, Alabama. My dad was an executive there in a State Farm regional office. And so I always considered Birmingham as the place where I grew up, because I lived there from age 10 through high school and finished college there at the University of Alabama, Birmingham. And it's also the place where I got into television. That's a long answer. You want to hear more?
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. So you actually start your career, when I was doing my little thing on you, you actually start your career behind the camera looking in at a Steve Sanders. Was it at WBRC in Alabama?
Right. I dropped out of college briefly, and some friends of mine had gotten jobs at the local TV station. So here I'm this college dropout. I talked my way into a job there and loved it. It was the most interesting, fascinating job. I got to know a lot of the on-air talent and started wondering, gee, I wonder if I could do that for a living. And I'll tell you something else. The summer of, I think, 1972, the Watergate hearings were on, and I was just fascinated, 1, with journalism, but 2, politics. Looking at the machinations of that, watching whether or not Richard Nixon was going to survive all this. The Watergate hearings were just an amazing lesson in civics, in politics. It was so incredible seeing really Republicans, moderate Republicans, working with Democrats across the aisle to find out exactly what happened with Watergate, and it was so fascinating watching that. So from there, I worked there probably too long, 3 years, as basically a stagehand, and there was an opening at a radio station in town. It was a brand new startup, and I heard they had an opening in the newsroom, and so I called the news director, asked him if I could come by and make an audition tape. He said, "Yeah." The long and short of it is, they liked it. I was able to, and he said, "I can hire you on weekends." And I looked him in the eye and I said, "Let me tell you something. I don't even know how to turn a microphone on.
Oh,
Can, can you still give
you're
me a
honest.
job?" Well, look, I knew if it would catch up with me sooner or later. I had been working on the side, learning how to write, working on my voice. I had a pretty strong Southern accent back then, I think, still do. And so he was able to give me a full-time job. That station over the next 2 or 3 years, WERC radio.
WERC radio, right, Steve?
Yeah,
Yeah.
they became #1 in the market, and I was working
Wow.
what's called afternoon drive, which is a pretty plum spot for a guy with basically little experience. And so it was a wonderful way to spend my 20s. I worked there again, probably too long. I worked there for 6 years until 1979, and wouldn't you know it, the NBC affiliate called WVTM asked me to come by and audition for a job as a weekend news anchor.
Wow.
So here I am. I bought a couple of cheap suits and ended up getting the job.
WVTM was the NBC affiliate, correct?
Yes, they were.
Yeah, they were an NBC affiliate. I just want to go back to something. I had read something where in '76, I think it was, you were doing was it like traffic reports in the helicopter where we almost didn't see Steve Sanders?
Oh, listen, that was a pretty close call. Let me tell you,
Yeah.
I was. Believe it or not, Birmingham, Alabama has traffic jams. I know people in Chicago think, "Oh, tell me about it," but they do. We had traffic reports, and it was a little, I don't know if you think about aircraft, but it was a little Hughes, what do you call it, with a little glass bubble on it. It's not like the copters we see now. But every morning I'd go up and do traffic reports. It was a great experience and put a little extra money in my pocket. But one day I'm flying with a new pilot, didn't know him very well, and we're on the way back to the airport. I think we're flying at about 800 or 900 feet altitude, and all of a sudden that drone of the engine just stops.
Oh,
and all you hear is this, and I look over it. We're going down, and I remember looking at the pilot. I went, "I'm seeing a golf course over here.
Yeah.
I'm seeing a large playground and park right there." And he looks at me, and I'll never forget this. He goes,
"Oh, wow."
So he ends up putting it into an older neighborhood with bungalows on either side of the street, cars pretty much parked everywhere on the street. He managed to find a driveway, angles into the driveway. We missed power lines, and we hit pretty hard. It's called auto rotation. That's what, and essentially auto rotation means that when you lose power, those blades keep turning. It's not like you fall out of the sky like a rock. And he was able to get a measure of control, but not enough control. So we hit pretty hard. I'll never forget seeing my Motorola walkie-talkie going right through that plexiglass bubble, and all kind of stuff scattered in the street. We cracked it up pretty good. I went out. I have no idea why we crashed. Turns out later we ran out of fuel, but I didn't know that. So I'm trying to get out. Tall guys instinctively, I'm over 6 feet tall. We instinctively duck like that because those blades are turning overhead.
Turning, yeah.
What I didn't know was the blades the impact bent the blades down like that. So they're turning this way. And they had chopped off the rear tail section. It bent it like an angle, actually. And so when I get out, one of those blades slammed me right across the back.
Oh,
And I hit the ground like a football linebacker had just face planted me. And so I had no idea what had happened, but I bellied out of there, and I didn't know why the pilot was still sitting in the chopper. Well, I think he knew we'd run out of fuel,
yeah,
which is why he stayed in
exactly.
it.
Wow. So more damage was done by the blades than probably the fall, right?
Yeah, and I'll tell you another interesting story. And I don't know if I ever told this to a journalism class or not, but TV news, radio news is very formal. I had to go. We were so shorthanded. I had to go in that afternoon and do an anchor shift at this rock and roll station. And the biggest news story of the day was my helicopter crash.
Oh, wow.
Would you believe that I didn't mention it? And here's why. News, like I said, was very formal. I didn't have a framework to how to explain that in the first person. Because newscasters are very formal, they're sort of distant, they're up here. And how do you say, well, I was involved in a helicopter crash today, but I'm okay? I guess I should have, could have, but I didn't mention it.
You didn't have the, yeah.
But all the TV stations ran it that day. It was a big story. Nowadays, of course, I would do it and play it up.
Especially now, Steve, with social media, there would have been no way to avoid it.
No, you couldn't. And but it would probably have been a bigger operation. It was right around Christmas time, and most of the staff was off. I'm kind of the new guy, so I was still there, and really the only guy around to do the news on that shift. So
wow,
that's the story.
I got to ask you, and I appreciate you bringing up those early years with Birmingham with the radio station and the stations that you work for. I have to tell you, WGN for me is like something, it's ingrained in me from my childhood because of people like, Fraser Thomas. I had mentioned to you before we came on, Carl Grayson, Jack Taylor. How does Steve Sanders get noticed by the superstation WGN? How does it start? Take me to that 1982 year.
Okay, so I remember 1979. I was hired as a weekend news anchor at WGN, and my co-anchor was a lovely, smart young lady named Denise Cannon. Denise and I became very good friends, and it turns out I was a terrible news anchor. And one of the reasons I wasn't quite connecting is because I hadn't had an eyeglass prescription change. I wore contact lens in about 5 years. I was blind as a bat and couldn't see the teleprompter, and I was stumbling quite a bit. And on the side, it turned out I was a much, much better reporter than I was an anchor. And so by the time I got this figured out, I think management had this idea that I was a guy that really didn't quite cut the mustard in the anchor seat. And so they pulled me off and they made me a full-time reporter, which was the best thing that could have ever happened, actually, because I was able to hone my skills as a reporter. I got a lot of good experience. And within about 3 years, that's when WGN came calling to hire me, not as an anchor, but as a reporter.
As a reporter.
And back to Denise Cannon. Denise had been hired. She was a wonderful news anchor. She had been hired about 6 months before I left to come to Chicago and anchor with John Drury on WGN. WGN management had decided, it might be a good idea to pair John with a female anchor, because that's kind of what stations were doing by 1982. And so they were paired together. Denise called me one day. There's so many sidebars in this story. I've got to.
Sure.
Denise called me and said, "Hey, we've got an opening for a political reporter. What do you think about coming to Chicago?" And I went, "Well, yeah." Birmingham was about the 43rd market back then. I don't know, low 40s. And I said, "You're not going to believe this. Now I have to tell you about my uncle." It turns out I was coming to Chicago on vacation the next week. And here's why. My aunt and uncle had lived in Chicago since the 1960s. My uncle Don Prince and my aunt Claire, also from Southern Illinois. Uncle Don was a college professor, had been. By this time, he was an executive at Rand McNally Publishing. And living in Winnetka, he called me and said, you know what, you got to come up here. He says, I play golf with the general manager at Channel 5, and I want you to get a tape. I'm going to get a tape to him if you'll send it to me, because I think you're every bit as good as these people in Chicago. And I went, well, I'm probably not as good as they are, but let me get you the tape. Well, lo and behold, he gets me an interview, and I think it was probably somewhat perfunctory, but Channel 5 was gracious enough to give me an interview, and it just so happened it was the same week that week before Denise Canada called. And so I stopped by to the interview at NBC. I met Carol Marine and her legendary, wonderful producer, and Don Mosley. And then I stopped by WGN, and within, 45 minutes, he was ready to hire me right there on the spot.
Wow.
And yeah, lucky break. And so let's see, I think he gave me about a month to get my stuff together and move to Chicago. So that's that story. It was
well, yeah, but I mean, right from the get-go, I mean, from what I can remember, you as the reporter, you as the anchor, there's a feeling of comfort with you, and I felt like GN, you fit GN like a glove. It's like, let's say there was a minor league for GN and they took you out of the farm system to replace some of these people. You were just tremendous because the versatility you showed as, like you said, a reporter and an anchor. You were a midday anchor, you were an evening anchor. I think they could have put you anywhere, and boom, you fit the bill. Did you feel a comfort zone with G? I mean, knowing now what you know, do you feel?
I really did have a comfort zone, and you learn. You get a crash course in the city of Chicago. I felt like I knew this city. We'd come here on family vacations a good bit. And Mike Royko, for instance, was syndicated in my hometown paper in Birmingham, as well as Bob Green. I'd read Bob. You learn a good bit about Chicago just reading their columns. So I'm hired here, and really my first real week on the job was the first week of '83, and they put me on the political beat, especially on the weekends. I'm the weekend reporter, which is a great way to start because there's no traffic. You can go from one story to the next. And they had me covering this mayoral candidate. They threw me right into the mayoral race, and I'm covering Harold Washington, probably more so than Richie Daley. Remember, they called him Richie, not Rich.
Richie Daley, Jane Byrne, Harold Washington.
Jane Byrne, right? And after about a month of covering Harold Washington, I come back to management and say, "Listen, this Harold Washington, this guy's got juice. He's got traction. I think you need to be following him because I think that the thinking was in those days that this was really a race between Jane Byrne and Rich Daley, and but I was seeing this groundswell of support for Harold Washington, and wouldn't you know it, but when the March primary comes up, Harold Washington emerges the winner, and so. It was quite a story. And then on to covering Harold Washington and the Republican candidate,
Bernard Epton.
And Bernard Epton ended up getting a significant chunk of the vote for a Republican. Yes. I don't know if you were around back in those days, but it was quite a story.
But Steve, I have to ask you, if you looking back, I mean, that was your first political beat. And of course, Byrne, a lot of people say that Byrne would have probably defeated Harold Washington if at that time Richie Daley didn't put his name in the hat.
You're right. It was classic triangulation in politics. And right. You're right. Those two split the white vote, cleared the way for Harold Washington. There were a lot of white folks in Chicago, I think, who thought the sun wasn't going to come up the next morning after he defeated Bernie Epton in the general election. But he did a wonderful job of reaching out to all elements of Chicago, and I think he proved a lot of people wrong and turned out to be a fine mayor.
And I have to tell you, one of the things that I want to bring up, since you kind of already dabbled with it, you wrote a piece when about Mike Ryko during, I think it was his obituary.
Yeah.
I mean, you basically, would you consider Ryko back in Birmingham? Because I wanted to mention this also. Would you consider Ryko like one of those first mentors for you from what you read?
Yeah, what an amazing writer! The guy just had this real gift for writing great declarative sentences that just cut to the core of the subject matter. And as I'm writing his obituary, I'm thinking, if I don't nail this, Mike Royko is going to come back from the grave and take me down. And
He would have. He
so
would have.
he would have. So that's one of the few stories I think I've ever written that I could actually look back a month later, a year later, and say, you know what, I don't think I'll change a word of that. Because any writer will tell you when they look at their stuff the next day, the day after, they think they see things they'd like to change. That story, yeah, I'm very proud of that. I won an award or two off that one.
Were you honored with an Edward R. Murrow Award for that? I think.
It was for something else. I think I got an Associated Press award for
yeah.
that. They don't call it that; they call it something else. But yeah, I was. That was a wonderful piece to cover. What a great story to cover.
I have to ask you. Okay, so you do this midday report, which was on Channel 9, and of course you're the anchor at night. Coming to Chicago, and I've asked in other interviews to other people, coming to Chicago. Okay, now you come to this market. You have this in control. When you knew you were going to be that daily anchor that we were going to see every day on TV, when did you feel like, okay, I got this? I mean, and of course, this market is a totally different market because we're always, analyzing and critiquing, just like our sports teams.
I didn't really have full confidence that I really had that job down for at least a couple of years. I didn't. I think I did it for maybe a year and a half, 2 years without a contract, which in this business is pretty unusual. But I noticed we were getting good ratings, and again, I think I'd rather be lucky than good. In this case, it was a little bit of both, but I was very lucky, and here's why. In those days, there was not a midday newscast on the other stations, what we call the O&Os, the network owned and operated stations, because New York was telling them that they were going to have to run soap operas in the middle of the day. And so the coast was clear for us to put a newscast on. So, and I had this terrific meteorologist named Tom Skilling.
Oh yeah, I think we know him.
And so, and I was a solo anchor and they did something. It was a 30-minute show, and they did something unheard of around maybe 1986. They expanded that show to 1 hour, and in those days, it was unheard of for a newscast to go more than 30 minutes. And so we're filling a solid hour, and we didn't have a huge writing staff. We were having to pad it with CNN packages. Those are reporter stories, but we kept getting really good ratings, and we held those numbers for a long time. And I think we'll get to this later. I ended up back on that show in 2008, and the ratings were still good. And I think when I retired, we were number one.
Well, and I gotta say, tell me if I'm wrong, Steve. I mean, like in our household, I'm the Channel 9 guy, and my wife's the Channel 7 person, let's say. And she'll be like, say, well, why are you watching Channel 9? And I always tell her, well, I feel there's not a lot.
Can we talk to her right now? Because I'd like to I could set her straight. I mean,
oh God, he would just say she's gonna watch this. But I have to ask you.
You know what? Your audio broke up just for a second. David.
Okay, yeah, we got a little freeze here. Here you go. No, I was saying that she's more of the Channel 7. I'm more of the Channel 9. I feel like some of the other stations in Chicago have a lot of sensationalism, where Channel 9 was more of a direct. And am I right in saying that?
Yeah, you are right, and I'm not sure why, but I think management Could be the fact that we were owned by the Tribune for so many years, and which was for so many years a great newspaper. Let's don't get into what they're doing now, but the Tribune was really the go-to paper for the entire Midwest, and had a large national footprint. And I think for us to go in that direction would just be wrong for the entire Tribune company. We're just not going to do it.
Exactly. Steve, what did you prefer during the career at 9? Did you prefer more the midday news or the being the anchor at night when we saw you at 9 o'clock?
Say that again. You broke up just a little bit.
Okay, no, I was asking Steve, what did you prefer more, the midday news or did you prefer being the anchor at night?
Well, the 9 o'clock news was considered, and still is, for WGN, the newscast of record. It was the end of the day. It was more prestigious. It got let's say it generated more income. I'm getting into business now. So for a lot of reasons, I think you'd probably prefer being anchor of the 9 o'clock news. However, I love the midday news. I was able to go. Well, I'd like to think I was able to get home at 6 or 7 at night. I was a reporter also during those years, so I did that show and go out and cover a story or two, get back and try to get home by 7 or 8. I was able to be home with my children, and but the 9 o'clock news was a big promotion that came in 1993.
Yes.
In fact, I'll tell you a great story. The day I was named to the 9 o'clock news, I got a call from a guy that I was working on getting an interview with, John Gacy, calling me on the payphone from death row. He was calling to tell me that he was not going to give me a one-on-one interview because he was mad at WGN. Because you remember back in those days, we didn't have a network and we ran made-for-TV movies, a lot of them. And it just so happened we were running a movie on John Gacy, starring Brian Dennehy as Gacy. And of course, the movie portrayed John Gacy as guilty, which he was. And Gacy was furious because he's trying to avoid the death penalty. He's trying to avoid being executed. And so that's why he was called to tell me by the way, he was telling me he's a big fan of the midday news. So, I could always tell my friends that we're the preferred newscast of serial killers, or at least that one, but that was about a 30-minute conversation. And I have to tell you, you get through talking with John Gacy for a half hour, your palms are sweating. You're wondering,
for sure.
That guy didn't get out.
Yeah, for sure. Because you talk about the professional, besides everything else that this man did. In the life that was wrong, he was a con artist with the media, I thought. And I saw his interview with Jacobson and all those years where he went to the jail. So talk about sweaty palms. I can imagine. I have to ask you this. She was a big part of me liking journalism. I thought your combination with Allison Payne was tremendous. And of course, we lost her too young, a beautiful woman. And of course, what a personality. But I thought both of you, Steve, with Allison, had a chemistry. Anything you'd like to say about her and these years you were with her?
John, let me tell you, that chemistry was very real. We were just like that. In fact, Allison would say, we were just like peanut butter and jelly. And she also referred to me as her, I was happily married at the time, but she referred to me as her TV husband. We were best of friends and worked very hard on that newscast. I can tell you, every election night we were brainstorming in one of our offices, working to see what we could do to make sure that we knew everything coming down the pike. We were generally very collaborative, and I miss Allison tremendously.
Over the years, I'm sure you had a lot of partners. I did mention to you about Mike Reichel being if that was a mentor. Are there people that you'd like to mention in this interview tonight about who were some of those early mentors and who were people you looked up to that said, wow, I want to do this? Steve Sanders wants to be this journalist?
There are quite a few, believe it or not, in my hometown of Birmingham, Alabama. There's no point in mentioning their names because most people in Chicago, will. But there were some great people at both television stations I worked at. Guys like Joe Langston, who you've never heard of, and I was friends with radio news anchors in Birmingham like Dave Perry, who I just really thought the world of. Dave thought he was a tremendous journalist, and these are people that you want to be like. They influence you. And later coming to Chicago, Bill Curtis, Carol Marine, these people are and were at the top of their game, just unbelievable. There were also people at WGN who really took me under their wing and kind of showed me the ropes, told me where all the bodies were buried. But some of them, a lot of them are still. Robert Jordan, tremendous guy,
Oh, yeah.
and Bob and I are great friends. He was very helpful, and somebody else, Jim Williams, currently the weekday anchor at CBS 2. Jim and I were very close. In fact, I think they assigned me to short-lived in about 19 morning newscast with Orion Samuels.
Oh, wow.
Who was, of course, the farm editor.
The farm reporter, yeah.
WGN Radio. Yeah. Orion was great at business, and he and I worked together. And the producer of that newscast came out at 6 a.m. I can't remember the name of the newscast. It was like 6 months. And Jim Williams was the producer of that. He was an off-air guy. He started at WGN as an intern. I think he might have even been a bozo usher, and worked his way into a job as a news writer in the sports writer in the sports department. Extremely bright guy. And Jim and I helped each other along as well.
Yeah, and now to see the success of Jim Williams, which I'm going to end this tonight with Jim Williams, a little surprise for you. But I have to tell you, the awards over the years, of course, you've had some Emmy Awards, and you even had this thing about investigating the American Bar Association Silver Gavel Award. Just tremendous work that you did. And, again, researching you and wanting to get to know you, you were a great writer. I mean, the people are always amazed at your writing skills. Steve, I was saying about your writing skills.
Yes, I will tell you, and I've been told this by people in management at WGN, and I missed a lot of that question, but you asked about writing skills. I think more than anything else, I think that helped me get the job at WGN, because it's one of the more overlooked talents in this business, and it was something that I'd always worked on. I found out, my dad, had been briefly worked as a reporter at a Decatur, Illinois newspaper for 6 or 8 months. And I always wondered why his writing was so good, simple, declarative sentences, straight to the point. It was a real talent. He'd also been an English major. And I think maybe perhaps I got that from him, the importance of just communicating in a way that maybe your grandmother would understand. And also it's important to know that, in broadcasting, at least in those days before we had DVRs, you only get to hear the story once. So you got to make it clear. And that was really what I worked at so hard. So I worked, yeah.
Well, before I let you go, can you tell me about your guitar skills?
I thought you'd never ask.
I heard you're an avid guitarist.
Let me tell you, I didn't pick up a guitar, at least on camera, for the first maybe 20 years of my career. I think TV news was much more serious in those days, and it was something I kind of kept on the back burner. I didn't bring it out, and I always wondered, can you imagine Walter Cronin coming up and playing rock and roll guitar? Or so I went, no. So it took a while for me get over myself, so to speak, and realize that this is fun. So uh, it also coincided with my move back to the midday news in 2008. We had rock bands on that show. We had a lot of groups, and every now and then, and by the way, Gibson, I think at some point sent us a whole room full of instruments. Here's one example. The Blues Brothers showed up. They were doing a benefit for prostate cancer, and it was only 3 of them that showed up, and they didn't have a bass player. And they were going to play Sweet Home Chicago, and I got to play bass with the Blues Brothers.
Oh,
so that was a memorable
excellent.
event. And there was a few other people, but I was able to sit in with people like, if you're a guitar player, you might have heard of Tommy Emmanuel, I think one of the greatest guitar players in the world. He let me sit in with him. And there was just 2 or 3 other things like that really were a lot of fun. And I think in a way, I'm not sure this is a good thing or not, but it redefined the public image of me. I think once or twice I looked over in traffic at a red light, and a cab driver is looking at me, and he's going,
"Oh wow,
playing air." Oh, it's people. I was at an art fair last week, and some vendor yelled, "Hey, you still play guitar?" I went, yeah.
But that's kind of a great feel for
you.
you. That's got to be a great feeling to know that people know that you were this avid guitarist also.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of people who think that if you can carry a tune and play 3 chords, you're Eric Clapton, which I know is not true.
Well, listen, Steve, I would like to end it like this. By the way, there was some, I want to tell you this from my end of it. I loved your Dead Giveaway series when you had that on Channel 9 also.
You remember that? That goes back a long way.
Yeah, that was a great, those were some of those early years with you. But I got to end it this way with you, and there was also a story with this Emily Bear, the piano player. I'll never forget that.
Yeah,
the great stuff. I have to tell you, like I said, I was kind of bummed when you retired in 20, but we all, nothing, as my mom would say, nothing lasts forever.
John, let me tell you, I don't interrupt you. I was already 70 years old.
You don't look 70 years old. You don't look great. You look great. But now I have to tell you, it's just like you get accustomed to seeing that person you want to see at night. Like we mentioned Drury. When I was growing up, I saw Faye Flynn. I saw Drury. I saw Bill Curtis. I saw Jacobson, Sanders, Rosenthal, Allison Payne. These were people that, you grow up with and you see every night come into your living room. And you, my friend, were basically a class act at GN, and you did a tremendous work, a great job. I got to end it like this tonight. We'll go back to Jim Williams, and he did say something that really caught my eye. And when I was doing my homework on you, Steve Sanders, when he's telling a story, really brings you in. He has the mind of a poet. And I want to thank you tonight for coming on Angles and Attitude. This was truly an honor for me to have you on, and I would like to talk to you some more again here in the coming future.
Hey, we'll do it again. I'll play guitar for you.
Okay, we're going to do the guitar work next time. Steve, really, tremendous that you came on the podcast here tonight, and really, we'll do the guitar thing for sure the next time.
We'll do it. It was my pleasure, John. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good evening and welcome this evening to another edition of Angles and Attitudes. Tonight, we are honored to have the business leader and consultant and author of the book that we are really going to promote tonight out there called The Next Shift. And also, my guest has a podcast called The Next Shift. It's Judy Gilbert, and this is her book, The Next Shift, that we're going to talk about in the podcast tonight. Judy, good evening and welcome to the podcast. And I can't thank you enough for coming on Angles and Attitudes.
Well, and good evening, John, and thank you. I just am so grateful that you reached out to me, and I've been counting down the days because sport and obviously my new book are near and dear to my heart, and any chance that I get an opportunity to talk about hockey, I'm there. So I'm all yours. This is fabulous. Thank you.
This is great. You know, I got to tell you, and of course, we'll tell our audience the other secret about you, which isn't a secret. You
Right behind me.
yeah, right. There's the secret. There's the answer. You know, this would have been maybe we're going to date ourselves here, but it's the old Groucho Mark. You bet your life. The secret is out there. But you are the niece to the great Robert Marvin Hall, and you are the niece to Dennis Hall. And of course, I was going to ask you, they had a brother named Gary Hall.
Yes.
That was in training camp in 1969-70 in the Blackhawks training camp. I don't know if he went on to play professionally or not, but I thought he had a minor cup of coffee with the Blackhawks. But coming from this hockey background of yours, and I read about it, and I'm going to tell you the similarities between the two. You start to get noticed when you were about 11 years old?
Well, I started playing organized hockey when I was 11. So by the time I was 13, I had some multiple schools reaching out to start talking to me about their college and university programs. And again, back then, that was sort of the late 70s, early 80s. And there weren't not a lot of opportunities for women in hockey at that point. Things were just starting to gain a slight momentum. But yeah, it was an exciting time. And I mean, for me, I just wanted to play. And the fact that, you know, schools were starting to chat with me a little bit, that was exciting. And that was my only avenue. I mean, and I played for the sheer love of the game. There wasn't the Olympics or World Championships to work towards. They didn't exist.
No, nothing like that. And I have to tell you, because, you know, when I read the book, you start at 11, but you start to get noticed a little bit when you're about 13 years old.
Yeah. You know what? And I've been playing on the backyard rinks, and we grew up on the Bay of Quinte, which is an expansive body of water that sort of feeds into the St. Lawrence and into Lake Ontario. And so I was always on my skates. And I think, you know, I think it's obvious that my love for the game does come partly because of my hereditary, the enthusiasts that came before me. And so in terms of my Uncle Robert and my Uncle Dennis, and I remember at a very young age, the only time I was able to stay up late was to watch the Hawks play the Leafs on Saturday night, hockey night in Canada. And so,
hockey night in Canada, yes. Was your mother and father, did your dad play a little hockey?
No, my dad didn't. So my mom is a sibling to Robert and Dennis. Funny enough, my mom, you know, came from a family of 11 siblings, and my dad was an only child. And so, you know, and he was, born in the late 20s. And so for him to have his daughter play hockey, this was something new for him. And it took a little convincing. And I think, you know, in fairness to my dad, we played a winter sport and a summer sport.
Right.
But I wanted to play hockey. And I think, I talk about it in my book that I think when push came to shove, it was my mom that put him over the edge, because, you know, she grew up with hockey. And I think she knew how important that was for me. And ironically, my dad became my biggest fan, and he loved coming to the rink and enjoyed, you know, whether it was my brother playing junior hockey or coming to see me. He just loved the game, but he never played hockey.
Okay, he never played, right?
Yeah.
Judy, I have to ask you, because like you said, when you started this tonight with me, back then, you know, even for me, I was playing on the backyards. We were hoping that the pond was going to freeze in Illinois, where you guys, and, you know, and I got to bring up this thing about the Bay of Quinte. Bobby has been interviewed, of course, so many times, and he tells the story that, you know, he would skate around this bay, and the family tried to catch him, and they couldn't catch him. You know, he goes, that's how fast he was then, you know. But, you know, there was a part here in the book that reminded me so much of my amateur career, because I was a goalie in a small town. And then I remember going to the university after I played the high school. And my mother, who couldn't speak English, one night told me, tomorrow you're going to a different level of the game. And I want you to know you are not going to be the star. Now, this is all told to me in Italian. My mother didn't know nothing about hockey. And I said to myself, she's out of her mind. What is she trying? She's trying to talk me out of this. When I went to that first tryout, in the book, you say about anxiety and, can I be part of this? I mean, there were guys like there were 6'3", 6'4", and shooting pucks like Bobby and Dennis. I was like,
Yes,
I
yeah.
think it's time to become the travel agent, So, but take us through that, because you wind up going to one of I think the 4 top universities in Toronto, York.
Yeah, I ended up at York University. I'll never forget the first time I laced on my skates, and I talk about that in my book in terms of that anxiety and wanting so much to fit in, but wearing my white figure skates because payday had not arrived for my parents until the following week. And it was a sacrifice for our parents to put us in hockey. And I have a regret that I didn't realize that until later as a young adult or as an older teen. And their sacrifice was immense. And so that first week probably could have been my last, but I thought, you know what, put your skates on and just go and do what you love to do. And so and then the rest, as they say, is history. And I went on to play and loved the game. And we were very fortunate in our town of about 45,000 that we had a group of young gals that came together that were very, very competitive. And yes, and then I went on to play at York University in Toronto, and had an opportunity to play at U of T. And I had also been approached by a school in Canton, New York, St. Lawrence College. And
oh, wow.
yeah, but at that time, again, scholarships were minimum.
Few and far between.
And those were designated or saved for perhaps girls from the US. And my parents could not afford to send me as much as I wanted to go. It was just not going to happen. And so, I ended up at York and had some successful years there as well.
What, and here we're talking hockey. I was a goaltender. What position did you play? I forgot to ask you.
Oh, I was a centerman and a right winger for most of my career. It was really funny when I went to York. I joined the team a little bit later in the season. The coach said, Judy, you're going to play defense. And I'm just starting to steam inside. I'm thinking, I'm not a defenseman. I came here to be a forward. That's why I was recruited. But the coaching staff had changed from the time I had been recruited. And so I thought, okay, well, I'll just bide my time. And I got an opportunity with the puck, and I took it and, was in on a scoring play, assisted on one, scored another. And coach came to me and said, you're now a forward. I said, that's what I thought it was going to be.
Oh my God. So yeah, they saw the ringer, or they saw already the little bit of the Hall gene.
I guess. But for me, I just wanted to compete, and I wanted to be the best that I could be and contribute to the game and to the team. And that's how I did it.
I love talking about the hockey part. As a woman back in that era, because now, we have the Kendall Coins of the world here out of Illinois and all that kind of stuff. Were you scared to play the game back in we're talking 70s, 80s, right? Late 70s. Yeah. Was it a scary time for a woman to play, or was like, you know what, I'm going to go in there with the chip on my shoulder?
No, you know what? I didn't know any of that. That wasn't really how it was presented to me.
Got it.
I think I grew up watching my uncles. Even though my brother was a little bit younger, I went to the rink to watch him play, and that's what I wanted to do. And so there were lots of people that said, maybe Judy should play on the boys' team. And my parents said, "What? There's a girls' team. She can play on the girls' team." And I when I think about that, it was pretty insightful. Because I know there were girls that went, long after me, there were girls that played on boys' teams to find that more competitive play. But
sure.
You know what? I was able to be competitive and see success and still have opportunities. And so I think that sort of helps that grassroots game when women support their own leagues. I don't object to girls playing on the boys' teams if that's what they choose to do. And our decision was that
Right.
it was never an issue. There was a girls team, and that's where I played. Now, we did play against my brother's rep team a few times just to have some games, but once we got to be about 16, the coaches decided that was enough. There was a big enough difference in size, and we were all very competitive that they said, I think these games are over.
Did your uncles or even your brother, like I know your brother didn't play, but did your uncles get involved when they would say, hey, are you playing this year? When they had the time, of course, I know their season started September to usually April.
Yeah, and I think they were done hockey by the time I started. And so, you know, those sort of, no, when Uncle Robert, I guess he wasn't quite finished up.
He wound up going to the WHA for a couple cups of coffee in the early 80s. Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, so he went to the WHA in 72. Yeah, it's frozen up a little bit, but I think it's
I think we're good now. Yeah.
So I mean, I didn't start playing until 76, and so yeah, they were still, you know, sort of at the tail end. But really interesting that Uncle Robert had a home not too far from us on the Bay of Quinte, and so he would it was about half an hour drive from Belleville.
They were from Point Anne, the Halls, right? They were from Point Anne.
Yes.
And I looked that up. Is it true that, Judy, it's only about 11 minutes away?
Yeah, it's just down, it's 7 minutes from Belleville. Okay. Yeah. And so he would come into our games on our home nights, and he'd come and he'd have dinner at the house, and then, you know, they'd head to the rink for the game. And so there was always a bit of a buzz when he would come, because he was retired at that point, and I was probably around, you know, 15, 16 at that time. And it was great. I mean, I didn't get to see him or Uncle Dennis growing up very much, other than a couple of times maybe in the summer. When they set down roots closer to home, it was really lovely. And I think that's really when our relationships, that we got to know each other that much better. And
sure.
They've always been very supportive and wonderful to me. And they've been very supportive of the book.
You know, and I have to tell you, I'd like to move on a little bit. I mean, love the story about the hockey. And again, I always tell people at the end, I don't do it with everybody, but I have to tell you right now, midway here, we're going to have to do a part 2, because I'm enjoying this and I'm feeling a flow. So we're going to have to do a part 2, but I have to tell you, what you did and I did are basically the same, because I started my career a little bit late, 11 years old, and that was in 1971. And then I got to high school in the mid-70s, played on the high school team. You studied communications at York. I studied communications at a university here in Chicago.
Yes, I did.
Loyola.
I studied communications.
And was this now the turning point for you now, being this consultant, speaker, doing the next shift?
The next shift. And you know what? I think that's a really good point, John, is that I really started to think about the skills that I had developed. And I really believe my parents laid that foundation, and then sport gave me the opportunity to really hone those skills. And so, you know, and I think I mentioned in the book that I was thinking that I would probably go into phys ed and teach. And then I ended up in this one communication course, and I was hooked. I was really hooked.
Wow.
And I think it's really the foundation of my business and my consulting business and being a leadership coach now. I think it's crucial that, you know, young kids know how to communicate, and that, you know, communication is not just about talking, it's about listening, and it's about learning about that conversation.
We have a leading journalist here in Chicago who's not a journalist anymore. He opened up his own communication company. And one of his slogans is something you just said: communications is no game. And I think it comes down to, like you said, you have to listen. You know, I haven't finished the next shift yet. You know, I have your marker. Thank you for the marker too. You've been very kind even to send a marker in there.
You're welcome.
But I have to tell you, in all the things that I've read so far, you know, how the athlete, if it was the amateur athlete like me and you, or the professional athlete like Dennis, Bobby, and the people that you mentioned in there, Nick Foley, Jackie Jarrell, Joe Chinook, Randy Jens, they have prepared themselves for that next step, where a lot of athletes and even just the common person, when something happens, I told my dad, oh no, I'm going to be Tony Esposito's backup for 15 years. My dad says, you must be out of your mind. You need to think about what you're going to do next, and take us through.
And that's really,
take
and
us
I
through
think
that part.
really,
Yes.
sorry, John, I didn't hear that.
No, I'm sorry. Take us through that part of, how you're, coaching and telling people to how to be prepared for this next step, especially after sport.
Yeah, and I think it's really important. The book is not just for athletes, it's for parents, it's for teachers, it's for coaches and mentors to start talking to these kids long before they're having to think about what their next shift is. And, and I think I talk about in the book about, it's wonderful if we're seeing success in our sport, but that's not going to last forever. And how do we identify the skills? How do we not compartmentalize? Because I know for me, and I mean, I knew there was nothing after university for me as far as, going on and to that next level with hockey. But I still had an identity crisis. I had always recognized and saw myself as a hockey player. And I think others saw me that way too. And so now all of a sudden, I didn't have that. So who's Judy? And what does that look like? And so I think it's really important. And we work through each chapter with the reader to say, hey, start thinking about, what resonates with you. Did you develop resilience? Are you focused? Are you a good communicator? Because these are the things that, college and universities want to hear about, or potential employers, or if you want to be self-employed. And so if we can't speak knowledgeably about the skills we have, how is somebody else going to identify those skills in us?
Judy, like when I opened it up here with you tonight about the book, I really feel like you say something in the book that's really important. You say that, the sport of hockey really now I find myself in my business setting goals, doing what I have to do, be determined. And I really do believe, and now when I read this, of course, now I'm 62 years old and I had to wait for Judy Gilbert's book to understand all this, that yes, this is what it's all about. And I really do believe I got that. And I think I do believe that I got that as being this goaltender. I was focused. I was determined, and you bring this out in the book. Do you see that with others? Like I see the comments from Foley and Sens in the book that I'm going to go on, but do you see that with all the people that you come into contact with?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I didn't want people to just take my word for it. And that's why I wanted to interview so many other athletes at different levels. I mean, there's a couple of Olympians, and I really believe that it doesn't matter what level of sport we play. We all achieve and have the opportunity to develop transferable skills. And so it doesn't matter if we're playing varsity or if we're an Olympian or if we're a professional. We have the same opportunities to start to develop some of those transferable skills that come from sport that we can use in our next shift. And really, that's how the chapters came to be, because when I was talking to each of these athletes, they started to repeat some of these things and identify some of these attributes and these competencies that they had developed and what they felt strongly about. And that's why it was really important that we hear from other athletes to get a really good cross section of not only different sports, but different levels. And I think that was really important. And that's what resonated with me.
Judy, do you find sometimes that, do you find that the athlete or the person that you're trying to motivate?
Frozen up there, John.
Okay. No, do you find the athlete or the person that you're talking to, do you find them to be like, no, Judy, I can't do this? Or can you bring them back to that next step? do you find that you've, you know, accomplished this with some of them?
Well, and I think that, you know, what's interesting is that whether it's a sport or a hobby or something else or a previous job, we all can acquire these transferable skills. And I've worked with some of my clients in terms of shifting from one career to another or one position in an organization to another. And so this really does apply to those folks as well. And that's the key, is to be able to identify those skills. And for an athlete, it's really important to be able to give really positive and strong examples of how they have acquired that skill. And so lots of times, many athletes don't have a lot of employment experience, but they experience on the ice or on the pitch or on the court. And so to be able to give examples of how they acquired that skill through sport, that's what employers want to see. And employers want to hire people that have been involved in sport and that have that work ethic. And not to say people who aren't in sport don't, but there's a bit of a given with people that come from sport, I think.
For sure. You know, I want to read a thing that came out from, correct me on this if I'm pronouncing his name wrong. Randy, is it Enns? Randy Enns? Ewens. He said, set goals for yourself. It doesn't matter if it's 6 month, a 3-year goal, set them and work toward them. I find that a lot of people don't set goals, Judy. They just sometimes figure, oh no, I can't do this. They don't go in there with, am I using the wrong word? They don't go in there with a plan.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And I think goals can be scary, because when we have to hold ourselves accountable, then what if we don't achieve that?
Right.
And you know what? And it's okay if we don't reach our goal. We can review and say, hey, why didn't I reach my goal? Okay, well, you know, some other things came up. I'm going to extend it. And I mean, that's what happened to me with my book. I had a date that I wanted my book to be done, and that date came and went. So I had to sort of have a conversation with myself, and I said, okay, why didn't I achieve that date? Okay, well, you know, business started to come back from COVID, and, you know, I needed to pay the bills and do my consulting.
Sure.
And, you know, I had to be in the mindset to write. And so I thought, okay, just set a new date. And don't beat myself up about it. Just move forward.
I want to kind of feed off that.
Okay.
What made you, did you always have in mind to write a book?
Do you know what? I have always loved to write. And over the last probably 5 to 7 years, I have been having conversations with myself about, when am I going to write a book? And it's been something I've been very passionate about. And so I know 2 things. I'm passionate about sport, and I'm passionate about writing. And I'm passionate about, I guess, 3 things: knowing that sport gave each of us something. And for me, as I said, I think it gave me, and it gave me my values and my skill set. And so I wanted to be able to, you know, put that into a book that could help other people. And so I've had an outline for my book for probably 4 or 5 years. And then I got to it about 2 years ago.
Right. I have to ask you, because, you know, like my son played hockey, of course, too, played at a little bit of a higher level than I did. He played at a college team here in Chicago called DePaul University.
Yes,
played on a lot of travel teams, where he was on like a AA travel teams, where
yes,
I was maybe at a lower level. But what I loved about it, and I could see it now with him, and again, it goes back to the Judy Gilbert book, The Next Shift. Yes, he didn't make it to that next step level of, you know, like say a junior team or something like that. But that controlled thing of 4 nights a week from those days, you know, I knew where my son was. I knew where we were going. If we were going to Toronto, if we were going in a tournament in Illinois, we were going to Sarnia. This he's brought into his business world now, and I can see how dedicated again and how focused he is. And again, it feeds back to a lot of things that you say in the book, I was mentioning to him that when I'm done with this book, I'm going to give it to him. And I go, and I don't want one page curled up. But again, do you like, there's that athlete, of course, that gets the big contract. Let's say he's going to get like 10 million for a signing bonus. Now, I guess that might be minimal. Do you, and then of course the major injury comes. Do you run into a lot of those athletes that now, again, are not prepared after this, you know, they blow out their Achilles tendon, but had a $10 million signing bonus?
Well, yeah, and they're out there, all right, and right, I think we all know that the game can end at any time, and so it's interesting that I'm just going to start doing a little bit of work with the NHL alumni, and closer to the fall, and to be able to, you know, provide some insight around the book and identifying our transferable skills. And because, you know, when we think about the number of players that don't have that, you know, 15 or 18-year career, I mean, it's some of these guys, I think the average age in the NHL is like under 25, it's 23, 24, right, whatever that may be. Very young. And then the average number of years in the league is really low, which really surprised me when I found that out. And so, you know, these guys coming out of that sport, and they don't have any work experience. Or minimal, right? They played hockey. And so they compartmentalize and think, well, I don't have any other skills. Well, yes, you do. And that's what I want people to understand, is that you have a plethora of skills here that are marketable, and you just have to be able to market them, communicate what they are, and speak knowledgeably about them to, you know, as I said, potential employers, or going back to school, or in your network. Networking is huge for any of us, right?
Huge. Judy, do you find yourself, because I know you've written a book, you're a business leadership, do you find yourself, even at this stage of the game of your life, that you're doing more speaking?
That's the goal. I mean, I do some, I've always had to speak with any of the roles that I've had, even before I resurrected my consulting business a few years ago. The goal for me is to be able to speak more about these skills, and to be, you know, a keynote speaker per se. And you know, that takes time, and obviously, but I really feel strongly that, you know, to speak to varsity teams or college sports teams, be it hockey, basketball, soccer, it doesn't matter the sport, and to be able to share the book and the lessons learned in that book, and to be able to share with them how to identify your own skills and start to think about those things. And so
I'm the skills in the job search. Exactly.
Yeah. Yes. And I'm going to be starting to do more speaking around the book.
Yeah. And of course, you know, the book itself, I mean, I could see how you could get this off in the speaking end of it, because you really focus on a thing that's on the back of the book, which I love. You know, you say, and we've been saying this all along in every piece of the interview that we're doing now, let's be honest, we are not athletes forever.
Yeah.
Right. You know.
Yeah. And it's a hard reality when it happens. And it happens because of injury. It happens when we age out of a sport. It happens when we graduate and we've been playing varsity, you know, and so, or it happens when we're just can't compete at that level.
I have to tell you, I stumbled on you originally. I'll tell you how I stumbled on you, because I'm always looking to interview athletes or journalists or Judy Gilberts, because this is just fascinating me. But I stumbled on your interview with Uncle Dennis. And I have to, yes, that was a great interview with Uncle Dennis. And of course, I knew that Dennis was this comedian for the NHL. He goes to a lot of these dinners, and even the interview with you, I mean, some of the stories he told, and he wrote the foreword in your book. I have to tell you, can you just elaborate on him, life after hockey? I feel he's been very successful. Am I wrong to say that?
He really has been successful, and he knew when he left the game early and by his choice. He wasn't obviously he had opportunities to continue to play, and at 33 he said enough. And
Right.
so to go back to school and to get his degree and to teach, he's had an incredible post-hockey career.
Oh,
And,
God.
and obviously as a keynote speaker and comedian, he is one of a kind. But when I did those initial interviews, the next shift, that was long before the book. And really, that whole concept helped really bring into focus for me what the book needed to be about. And I knew I needed the book to be able to, one, to gain credibility and to be able to have something tangible. And so that interview with him, and I felt like it was just him and I sitting around, the dinner table type thing. And
but it was fantastic. I mean, it was, you really got the audience to listen, who's ever watched this video. I'm going to say, okay, what's this about? And then of course, the first thing when I hear that, you are his niece, but it was done so professionally, and the way he spoke about it, I said, wow, this is great. This is really great to hear about that athlete who now is doing something else, Yeah.
And he's always been extremely supportive, just as Uncle Robert is. And so whatever I'm into, if they can be a part of it, then they're happy to do that. And it was interesting because I had my book launch about a month ago here in Belleville, and they were both here, and they just signed books, signed and signed and signed. And it was just a real celebration. But yeah, I when I look back on that interview with Uncle Dennis, I look back on it with very fondly, because it was easy, and he is just so great to talk to. And he's always very he always wants to make sure people know, because I will not always bring up, I will introduce him at an event or do something, and he'll come up and say, okay, well, Judy didn't say it, but she's my niece. And so,
wow.
And he made sure to do it in that interview as well.
And you know what, from an outsider looking in, for the first time, this is, your uncle, this is Judy Gilbert. You could see that Dennis Hall was genuine. This was not a pre-staged thing. No. He was genuine. And even, Bobby, I'm sure too. And by the way, I want to show the audience something that you touched my heart with. This was signed by Bobby. And of course, Judy. I like the Judy Gilbert signature will be worth more money in 20 years.
Oh, wow.
And Dennis Hall, of course.
And Uncle Dennis.
This is from Judy. Of course, the book, The Next Shift. But yes, that triggered me. But again, I loved your interview with Foley, Jarrell, Chinook, and I think there was another, and Randy, of course.
Yes.
Have you done any more? I know I don't want to get off topic of the book, but have you done more?
No, that's okay. I haven't, but I've done some other more just podcasts or around the book itself. And
I saw that.
Yeah, and then I've got I think 8 or 10 small snippets from where we take pieces from that initial interview and sort of advice from the book. And so the goal is that I want to continue on this path with the book. I think that when we put our heart and soul into something that we do feel passionate about, that I really want to give it the opportunity to grow and to get out to as many people as I can. And so I'm starting on this quest to contact sports organizations across the country. And so it seems daunting, and it is, but it's what I want to do.
I'm going to go back to something you just said maybe about 3 minutes ago. From those interviews with the Dennis, the Foleys and everybody, and Jarrell, was it then, because you had said you had done those interviews before you wrote the book, was it then when you says, okay, I got this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to get myself out there? Was that your focus?
I think that was a big part of it. I mean, I wanted to write about something, as I said, that I was passionate about. And this whole idea of these transferable skills and sharing my own stories of and then introducing these other players and sports people from different sports then I thought, this is it. This is so, I created an outline and then I got to it. And so, I mean, I think it probably was about a year and a half after that, that I started to put pen to paper and get going on the book.
Judy, how long did it take you to how long does it take to do the book?
Well, I started it just after COVID. And so, as a business owner, and with, we all know what COVID did to so many people and businesses. And, my business came to a screeching halt,
Sure.
other than a couple of clients here and there. And about a month or two into COVID, after I had done every odd job around the house I could do, I
Right?
thought, if I don't write this book now, and if I don't start this book, I'm going to be pretty disappointed in myself. And so I started. I created the outline, and I had some folks that, some mentors that were kind of helping me along the way, and so that's how it came about. And so I knew that what that outline was going to be, and I started just writing down all of my personal stories about hockey, and sort of recording those and recalling those things. So the whole process, it was about 16 months because there were days that I didn't write. COVID impacted all of us in different ways, and there were days where I just couldn't write. And then there was other days I wrote all day.
You were free flowing, right?
Yeah. And I guess that's what happens when you're writing. I mean, I didn't know because I'd never written anything like that
before, right? I have to tell you, I mean, I feel connected to you in this way because, again, we're playing hockey and we played hockey. We went for communications, and then talk about a business being impacted. I don't know whose business got impacted more. My family has had a travel agency for over 50 years in Chicago, and let alone that people are going on the internet more and more. When I tell you, Judy, I didn't do nothing for a year and a half, I didn't, but I kept myself motivated because people would say to me, I saw you at the office the other day. Well, I says, I'm not going to sit home and watch reruns of the Blackhawks or the Chicago Cubs. I have to find a way to make some kind of a living here, even if it's refunding or doing something. So I just feel connected to what you're thinking. There's something in the book that I want to, a little thing that I want to read just to get this out. And I want you to I tell you that I'm going to push this from my end, because already I was telling people tonight, they go, well, who's on the agenda tonight? And I go, it's Judy Gilbert. And of course I had to tell them about the book, The Next Shift. And of course about that Bobby and of course Dennis were your uncles. But there's something in here where you say, reputation should be based on integrity, good intentions, doing the right thing, being in control of our character, being accountable for our actions. Let's face it, we all make mistakes, but what is important is how we atone for these mistakes and how we take ownership of them. I mean, that gave me goosebumps just reading that, because again, you're focusing on the positive for this person to go to the next step.
Yeah. And I believe, anything I wrote in that book, I either lived it or I believe it, or they're the values that, that I sort of try and live my life by. We all make mistakes. There's no doubt about it. None of us are perfect. But I think it's how we self-reflect and how we do atone for those things. And that, if we've hurt somebody, whether it's intentionally or not, and hopefully it's unintentionally, that we say, hey, you know what? I need to go back to that person and say, I may have hurt your feelings, or did I say something to offend you? I think self-reflection is huge, and a lot of people don't do it.
Right. And I find, Judy, that what you just said to here now, that's the easiest thing to do. Like I said, I had an Italian mother that would tell me, John, and I was very shy when I was young. You would never get this much out of me when I was young. I'd be like 2 words. Hi, Judy. Bye, Judy. But I have to tell you, she would say to me, the easiest thing to do is to say hello, if someone is interested in your conversation, but never be afraid, because like you said, we are all going to make a mistake, and we're all going to have to, do something to correct that mistake.
That's right. And, and again, it comes back to that foundation that my parents created. My self-worth did not come from playing hockey. My self-worth came from knowing what my parents felt about me and what they told me. it wasn't about me as a hockey player.
Right.
It was about being Bill and Jackie's daughter.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Very, very, very well put. Well, if you don't mind, I guess to learn more about you, if you don't mind me, I'm gonna to say something to learn more about Judy and the work that she is so passionate about. Without a doubt, visit the website judygilbert.ca.
Correct.
And or the nextshift.org.
Mhm.
I don't know how to thank you for the book. Really, this has been something that as soon as I got it, and I want to thank my brother-in-law for paying you for the book. Like I gotta get this to Judy Gilbert. And Mike came through and flying cuts. But I just love the front of this, Judy, where it says a guide to identify your core skills and successfully transition from sports.
Yeah.
This is a must read, everyone. The Next Shift by Judy Gilbert. Judy, I mean, I want to finish the book and get you back here in the fall.
I'd love to.
And then I want to find out, you're going to tell me in the fall that maybe you're a Pulitzer Prize winner. You know,
Well,
that'll be next.
Well, I'll have an update for you at that point in terms of where we are with the book and what I've been doing. But John, I can't thank you enough. This has been absolutely delightful. And as I said, any chance I get to talk about the things that I'm passionate about and that somebody's interested in that, and a fellow hockey player, and in Chicago, no less.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, when I say stumble on you, I'm always looking, and and I learned a lot from, because you can always learn from somebody else
Yes,
in
we
speaking
can.
and how you approach something. And like I said, when I saw your interview with Uncle Dennis, it wasn't about Uncle Dennis at the end. At the end, it was about Judy Gilbert.
Well, that's very lovely of you to say. And they created their own identity, and we were told we would always create our own as well. And I guess hockey just has played a huge part in me creating my identity, for sure.
And I got to tell you, to end it this way tonight, both of them, one in the forward and one, I think, where Bobby wrote something here in the beginning. I have to tell you, and I want to reiterate it, because sometimes with family, you don't hear it. They are very proud of you, young lady, because
Thank you. Thank you,
I
John.
saw that from both uncles, and that again gives me goosebumps. I want to tell you, thank you. And I want you back on here in the fall. This is fantastic.
I would love it. And thank you, John. It has been absolutely terrific. And it was really lovely of you to reach out to me, and I'll look forward to our next meeting.
All right. Have a great evening. Is it cooler there than it is here? Because we're facing 95-degree temperatures.
Oh no, it's hot here.
Oh,
too.
it's hot. So it's hot
It's
everywhere.
hot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I won't be coming there in the winter, but
Hey, our winters are just like your winters.
oh, I know. Sometimes those Chicago winds off Lake Michigan make it even
That's right.
worse.
That's right. Well, thank you, John.
Thank you. Good night, Judy. And
Good
thank
night.
you.
Bye-bye.